Good afternoon. Welcome to the Advanced WMS series. This is the concepts behind location-based inventory. I'm Shanna Blackstone. I work in the WMS department here at VIP. We've been doing this series for quite a while now, almost 2 years, I think. This is a monthly series where we talk about WMS-related materials. In today's session, this is actually going to be a great session for a couple of different things. If you are new to LBI, this will introduce you to some of the concepts. If you have had LBI for a while and maybe have some new people working for you, this is also going to be great for them because they didn't get to go through the implementation where we went over these concepts. So this will be a great refresher course for anybody as well. Something important to note, I have a lot of material here. In fact, I had so much material, we decided to make this a two-part session so that way we could really go over everything and not kind of rush through it. I am going to probably go over the 30 minutes today, so hang on if you can. If not, remember that all of these are recorded and we post them on the support site so you can access them at any time. If you have questions, remember that all of your questions we're going to answer at the end, and if we don't get to it during, obviously, the session, there's always a Q&A that we send out as well. So let's go ahead and get started here. One of the first things, there we go. One of the first things that I like to talk about is really what is WMS, and the reason being is I think sometimes people think LBI is WMS, but really WMS is a system or a suite of products, and at VIP they're comprised of a few different things. You might be using some form of receiving in the warehouse or counting in the warehouse. You might be using a truck diagramming program such as WebTL or PalBuild. Or the other options we have are picking related functions, easy pick and voice pick systems. And then last but not least, location-based inventory or LBI, which again uses a variety of different equipment based on your choice. So now that you're more familiar with really what is WMS, let's talk a little bit about LBI in general. The idea of using this part of the system, this advanced piece of inventory, gives you a lot of capabilities. You basically get to see where your product is in the warehouse at all times. You can also obviously track the code dates of this product. Hopefully that allows you to basically manipulate what you guys have in and out, so you're making sure that you're getting the oldest code dates out the door in time to your retailers. And then on top of that, you can direct picking by code date. That gives you a lot more flexibility with LBI, and you can even create replenishment tasks so that your employees are really focused on what they need to do to get done rather than just replenishing anything that they see fit. So as far as that goes, really let's talk about what LBI is. It's pretty straightforward. It really is just a tool that you can use to track product by location and code date. And again, it gives you all those same benefits. But one of the things that always comes up when we talk about location-based inventory is this concept of a layer. So for any of you who are not on LBI, if I asked you what a layer is, many of you might say, oh, well, it's like a tier on a pallet, or, oh, it's a layer that I pick with like my claw line, you know, that kind of thing. But we're really using the word a different way when we talk about LBI. Basically, what this is going to be is it is a location, a code date, and a quantity, and one of those things is different, and that basically says this is a layer. So product could be in a different location. It could be in the same location but with two different code dates. That's going to create a different layer. And then obviously there's always a quantity associated with the product in general. So what I'm showing you guys here is just kind of an example of when you are non-LBI, what the system really looks like, and when we turn LBI on, what you're going to be able to view. So when you don't have LBI, basically you are able to see a total amount. You're able to see 500 cases. So you can see that there in the middle column. I can see 500 cases. I don't necessarily know where they are, but that's how much I have. When I turn LBI on, though, we then build layers. So now we can see that we have a pick location. We have a couple of backstock locations. We even have a backstock location that has multiple code dates in it. So it's really displaying to you exactly where your product is and how much is associated with each of those layers as well. But the most important thing that you need to understand is that the total quantity in both of these are exactly the same. So what I'm showing you here is kind of the same exact thing. It's the same numbers, but what I wanted to show you guys in particular was the difference between the two files. So if you're non-LBI, the only file you have is the on-hand file, and I kind of just gave you what it's called behind the scenes, the inven file. And that gives you the total number like I was just talking about. Well, what happens is when we turn LBI on, we build a new file. So not only do you have the on-hand file, but you now also have the layer file. And that basically, again, is divvying up all of the product between different locations, code dates, and so on and so forth in your warehouse. Okay, but remember that the quantity always equals the same when you actually total those up. That's a very important part of LBI. So for those of you who maybe have not implemented LBI, or maybe it's newer to you and you're just trying to figure out things still, what are some things that can make you more successful with LBI? One of the first things you have to understand is it really is a strict program. There are rules set in the fact of every time someone moves something, they have to tell the system that they moved something. So if you don't follow those rules, you're not going to be very successful with the program in general. It's a bit of a culture change because now you are putting equipment in basically everyone's hand and saying, okay, if you're picking something, if you're moving something, we need to be telling the system what's going on here. And then choosing the right equipment as well is very important. What we're trying to do now is develop a program, Easy Ops. Some of you might be familiar with it. You can receive in it and you can move product in it. And those are the two key pieces for LBI that you can do right now. And what we're going to start developing are the task-based functions. So counting and replenishment tasks are eventually going to be available in that program as well. Something a lot of people say to me is they think that LBI is really going to fix any of their inventory problems. And unfortunately, that's just not true. Really what it is you have to have a really great understanding of general inventory in VIP before you jump to these advanced settings. So if you don't have a great handle on the inventory now, we would highly suggest you do that first. Then once it's really successful at that piece, add in this tool that allows you to manipulate your inventory even more. And then last but not least, anytime you're implementing anything new, we really think this is a great time for you to kind of evaluate any processes that you're doing that relate to inventory. And remember that everything kind of relates to inventory. Orders in the system, checking product in, recon, all of these things relate to inventory. So it's a great time to evaluate what you're doing and try to implement some best practices as well. One of those really being is the timing that you run register. That's an important one to us. If you run register at night, you're going to have a lot easier implementation of LBI. If you run register the next day, it's not impossible to implement. It's just a little more work in the fact of understanding what the system is doing and when you should count and when you should not count and so on and so forth. I also gave you a little bit of a statistic there. Down at the bottom, we only have about 100 customers of our 380 plus customers using LBI. It is something, like I said, it is an awesome tool. It can be very helpful to you, but you really need to kind of do all the above first before you're ready to implement it. We've even had people that have decided it wasn't for them. We've also had people that decided it wasn't for them. They reevaluated their processes and then went back to it. So again, just thinking about all these things first before you jump right in to LBI. So like I said, one of the pieces is really understanding the general inventory. So what I thought I would do really quick for you guys here is define some of the inventory terms that we have. And one of those terms that we always talk about a lot is the on-hand amount. And in the knowledge base, it describes it in a much more professional way. I am just kind of giving you a quick way of thinking about it. Basically, it's the inventory that you still own. So if you think about it, orders versus invoices, when I'm sending orders in as a salesman, I still own all of that inventory. That's still part of my on hand. But as soon as I invoice that, I'm actually selling it. I'm saying this belongs to someone else now, and it's no longer part of my on hand. Another term you guys hear us say is committed. Now I have sales in parentheses there because there's two different types of committed when you turn LBI on. The sales commitments are the ones you guys have always been used to. So basically the orders hit the system and we're setting aside inventory to say, hey, this inventory is set aside for that order so we can pick it later. What that then gives us is if we take the on hand and we subtract the committed from it, that's going to give us the available. So what I can still sell. So that's the number that really your salesmen are interested in seeing is, or even, when you're managing out of stocks, what do you still have on hand to fill orders? There's a few other terms here. I'm not really going to go into those. They're pretty straightforward. But the term that becomes new when you go to LBI is the committed in the layer file. Okay, so remember I told you that there's two different files now. There's an on-hand file, now there's a layer file. Well, within the layer file, when we run certain programs, it will actually commit inventory to be used, whether it be picking, maybe it's replenishment, even for orders as well too, depending on what you're doing. And basically there's two different programs that really commit layers. The truck diagramming programs and any automated replenishment programs. So IY refill, we're gonna talk about that very briefly in this session here. But those two programs are really what's committing the layer file, okay? And we'll get some visuals of that in a little bit. Something I else wanna talk to you guys about is introducing you to some of the new terms that are going to pop up when you start LBI, or really new procedures, honestly. Those things that you're going to be need to using when you turn LBI on is you need to do some sort of receiving program out in the warehouse. It's going to make everything a lot easier for you. We have Easy Ops, and then for those of you still using RF, we have RF Receive. Not something you have to be doing with LBI, so this could be some precursors to getting you ready to make that jump. There's also manually moving products. You're going to need to be able to move products from A to B and tell the system basically that this is what I did. Breakage and adjustments. You can do this if you have RF units now. You can actually do this on the fly out in the warehouse. So this is something you can start prior to LBI. You're going to be introduced to something called RF task. So basically this is going to allow you to complete generated tasks for counting and replenishment. And you're also going to be introduced to something called RF Vary, which basically allows you to correct variances that were created during counting while you're out on the warehouse floor. A few other things you're going to see. You're going to see FI count. That's going to help you actually generate the tasks for counting. You're going to be introduced to some new reports. We're going to go over one of those reports in the next session a lot because it's very helpful to you. PR Loc is what that is there. You're also going to see something called auto slot. This is actually a very powerful tool, and we're going to talk about this one here because I think a lot of people want to use it right away, but it's not always the best practice to use it. And we'll talk about when to and not to use it. And then last but not least, we'll go over this in session 2, but IY refill, so being able to generate replenishment tasks automatically as well. So I'm just taking a step back. We're going to talk about those layer commitments particularly when it comes to truck diagramming. So we're just talking about this. What I'm showing you here is what the layer file would look like for a particular item. So I can see that I have a pick location and I have a backstock location, and those would also have code dates associated with it. But I can see that I have an on-hand column, a committed column, and an available column. And this shows the same for anyone using LBI. You can see these 3 columns. And basically, prior to any commitments, you can see that the commitment column is 0. So if I were to run the WebTL program, or even PalBuild, what's going to happen is if any of that item is on that load or on that order, the system is actually going to commit that to be picked. So you can see here what's going to happen in the system is I have 50 on hand in the pick location, but 10 of those are actually getting committed during the truck diagramming process. And I now only have 40 available. It's not that there's less in there. If I walked up to the location, there'd still be 50 in front of me, but really 10 of those are going to be picked by someone. So I could only potentially move manually 40 cases. And that's just kind of what this is displaying. This is an important concept because a lot of people think that the easy pick and the voice picking process is actually what's committing inventory or making the available go down. And that's not the case. It really is the truck diagramming programs that do all of this. Even before you've started picking, you're actually committing inventory just running these programs. Another way that layer commitment happen in the layer file is with replenishment. So we can see here we kind of have the same case, but in this example here, I don't have anything in the pick location. So because I have nothing in the pick location, great, I'm going to run a procedure that's going to tell me go fill the pick location based on my parameters. So here's that procedure there. And what it's telling me is that I have 100 cases in backstock, but I want to move 48 of those to the pick location. So what it's going to do is commit 48 cases and tell me that there's only 52 available in that location. So if I walked up to that location, that backstock location, I might see 100 cases in front of me, but I can only manually move 52. The other 48 cases that are sitting in front of me have to be completed with a task. So that would be, like I was introducing you to, RF task. If I complete that task, this is then what the layer file will look at. You can actually, or look like. You can see that on hand went to 48 for the pick, and that the backstock location, that really should say 52 and 52 available. My apologies for that. That should say 52 on hand and 52 available. Those should match. But anyways, what we're seeing there is basically that the product has actually been moved. The commitment is no longer there. Okay, so what we're going to do now is look at LBI locations and talk about in general what becomes available to us. So for any of you using Easy Pick, Easy Ops, maybe you're scanning your picking documents, you might already have pick locations designated in your warehouse, but it's also a must for LBI. Pick locations can be anything: the claw line, the flow rack, pallet stacks, racking, whatever those might be. Where are you actually going to pick the product from? Something else that comes into play when you turn LBI on is backstock locations. So basically anything can be stored in any backstock location. That's the beauty of using LBI. You can always see where it is, but you also have the ability to kind of manipulate if you want product picked from those, which you can't really do without LBI. There's a procedure called work loc meth. Some of you might be familiar with it. I'll go more into that in session 2, but basically this allows us to manipulate where product is picked from as well. And then last but not least, there are staging locations. So staging locations really are where products can be put for a short period of time. I have quotes around short because what I'm saying is it could be a night. It could be a return location. It's only there for half a day. It could be a seasonal location where you're storing product for potentially 2 months. And it's going to hang out there, but it's not going to live there forever. So what I thought I would do is define some of the LBI locations that if you have LBI on, you might see these and might really not understand what these are there for. What do they look like? Why do I have these in the system? And for those of you going to get used to LBI, these are some of the things where you're going to start seeing. So what I have in here are the VIP best practices for naming the locations. This is what the knowledge base would call them. Some of you might have different names. So the star good location might be in your warehouse called returns. The reason I'm recommending these is because when you call into customer service and you say, hey, my star good location, they're going to know right away what you're talking about. But if you say my return location, you might need to do a little more explanation or give a little more explanation to that customer service rep to really get the point across of, hey, what are we actually talking about here? I'm going to go into star good, star bad, and FX BAL in visuals in a second here. The no location given, or star no loc, or default, you might be calling it. Basically, when you count, receive, you do any sort of transaction, if you don't put a location in the system, the VIP system has to have something. So it creates this fake location, this default location, and it assigns product to that. This is actually a big deal. We'll talk about this a little bit more when it comes to breakage, repack, and so on. A few other staging locations you guys might see. Again, it's completely up to you. You can name them whatever you want. There's six character locations. The dock is where you might be staging product to. A pallet location, you might be counting all of your empty pallets there. An empty location, you might be keeping track of all of your empty kegs there. So again, you have ways to kind of manipulate the system as well. So let's talk about some of these staging locations. Let's talk about star good. Like I said, it is a staging location, and the idea is that all of the product coming back from the trade, anything that's available for sale, would go to this location. And what's important to understand is the majority of you product probably have your system set up so that the product actually stays in this location even after register is run. And then that allows you to decide when it's time to put the product away. So let's kind of give an example here. Here's Star Good. And what I'm going to show you is I have obviously a truck coming back. And we're going to go ahead and check in that truck, and we pull 2 cases off of that truck. And in doing so, we find out these 2 cases are good. So my checker is going to mark them as good. Hopefully my driver did the same thing. And before register, what's going to happen is as soon as that upload happens, this is what it's going to look like in your layer file. You're going to see 2 on hand, or 2 for a quantity. You're going to have 2 that are actually committed still and nothing is available. And the reason being is register hasn't been run. So technically it's really not a part of your inventory until register runs. After register runs, the committed goes away. We now have 2 available, and we can do whatever we want with those cases. We can move them to the pick, move them to a backstock, whatever we need to do. Now the Star Bad location, okay, again, also is a staging location. And this is usually created for product that is not available for sale. Now, this really does depend on your setup in VIP on whether or not you're using this process. The majority of you should be using this. If you're using LBI, we would want you to be using the bad product coming back in and having that broken out during register. So let's take a look at what that looks like here. Basically, a truck's going to come back. And we're going to take product off that truck just like we did before. And when we check over that product, we're going to recognize that that product is not available for sale. So our checker is going to mark it as not available for sale. Hopefully our driver recognizes the same thing. So before register, this is what our system is going to look like, just like the Star Good. But after register, if we have the system set up to do this, we can actually have the Star Bad location cleared out, and anything that comes checked in as not available for sale can actually go right into the breakage bucket as we select it. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to talk about counting inventory, because that actually changes pretty drastically when you go to LBI. The idea is that you don't have to use RF count, 5R, 5INV anymore. The idea is you'd be using very different programs that make the counting process a lot more flexible. So when you are not LBI, there are some things that you have to follow. One of those things is you have to count all of a single item. So you might be cycle counting, but if you count an item in the pick, you also have to count it in the back stock and anywhere else it might exist in your warehouse. One of the questions some people ask is, do I have to count code dates when I'm not LBI? You don't have to, but if you want to run any of the reports to give you code date options, basically saying what's my oldest product in here, particularly the inventory shelf life report, you have to count those code dates for that report to really work as efficiently as it can. And then the other part of it is we have this on floor amount that we have to calculate appropriately. So what number are you physically counting when you're non-LBI? You're counting an on floor number. You're not really counting an on hand number. So we get into 5R and SS pre-par. If you guys have any more questions about those things, I did a webinar back in November about those, and you can kind of look more into the Easy Ops program, and it talks about SS pre-par and 5R as well. But for those of you who are really interested in LBI, these are the benefits that you're going to get out of this. You don't have to count all of the inventory. The cool part is because we have everything broken up by location, you can literally go to one location, count everything that's there for that item. You could potentially be done if it all matches. You can count less inventory. So really the idea is that you could just count the pick and the layer line if you wanted to. And by doing that, you would catch the majority of your variances there, because that's where most of the product is moving from. You might also count the back stock a couple times a week or once a week. Keg coolers, again, it gives you a lot more flexibility of when you want to count and what you want to count. And then the last thing that I like to let people know is if you're running any of those reports, the inventory shelf life report, the old beer report, you don't need to count code dates for those reports to actually work appropriately. It's completely up to you whether you want to count the code dates or not. Something I do want you guys to kind of just realize, there is no on-floor amount when you are using LBI. The whole piece of on floor is taking your on hand and removing on truck. So if you guys do any driver cell, if you load cases onto the truck in the morning, those pieces, that's not taken into consideration with LBI. So it's something you're going to have to think about and work with your WMS rep to understand, how is that handled? How should I handle that when I'm actually counting my inventory in the morning? Same thing for back off. If you invoice something but you don't pick it, there's no way of removing or adding that back into your on floor amount. So again, just take some conversation with VIP to understand how is that best going to work when I count my inventory in the morning. Okay. One of the other concepts you guys might hear us talk about is something called IY Lokbal, and some of you might not have any idea what this is, but all of you should know if you have LBI on, this runs in the middle of the night after register is done, and it's basically making sure that your on-hand file matches your layer file. So remember, we looked at it earlier and we said on-hand had 500 cases. All of the layers had to add up to 500 cases as well too. So this is a very important process and keeps us in line. What you're going to see often is if this ran and it needed to create a location or need to create a layer to make everything balanced, you're going to see this layer called star FX val, or you guys might have it called ZFX val. We set this up so that you can visually see if there was an issue where the layer file is not matching the on-hand file. So let's take a look at that visually, what I mean, so you guys can kind of wrap your head around that. So basically, this is after register, but before IY Lokbal is run. Here's what the system is saying. The system is saying I have 55 cases in 101. I've got 100 cases in Bravo 101. And I've got 2 cases that came back into Star Good. On this screen here, it's saying that my on hand is 157 and my layer file is 158. Unfortunately, I did my math wrong and I apologize greatly for that. This is my fault here. Really what we should be seeing is that the inven file should be 156, the layer file should be 157, because if you do the math, it actually works out that way. But that is what I'm looking at there. Once I run IY Lokbal, what the system is going to do, it's going to create it so that I actually match going forward. So if I really have 156 cases on hand and my layer file thinks I have 157 cases, it's going to create a star FX val layer to make those match. So notice that it's removing one case so that it would match 156 cases appropriately. When I have created my star FX vals, and we'll go into that. We're actually going to see how to troubleshoot those even more so later on in session 2. When I create those, I need to figure out how to move those. And one of those things that you guys are used to or you've seen is the program called Auto Slot. So basically what this does is it takes product from one location and it sends all of that product to a designated pick location. So if I had the Star Good location, for instance, and I had product coming back into that, let's say that I've put all that product away to the pick locations, I want to move that really quickly into those pick locations. So that's what I could use Auto Slot for. It doesn't work for the layer line, something to think about. If you guys have that as a pick location, it's not going to move any product to the layer line. It is, if an item doesn't have a location assigned to it, a designated pick location, it's actually going to stay in the original location you were trying to move the product from. So that's important to look at. And then even if the location is not available for sale, it's still going to move that product. And we'll talk more about what not available for sale means in session 2, because that's also an important piece of LBI to understand. So let's just get an example here. Here's my my locations that I had prior to. And basically what I want to do is run Auto Slot on star FX val. So I'm going to run the program Auto Slot. I'm going to choose star FX val. And when I do so, what's going to happen is notice that that -1 actually moves to the pick location. So now my pick location is 54. My backstock is 100 and Star Good is still fine. I still have 1 case in Star Good at this point in time. With Auto Slot, you can also use it, like I said, on Star Good. One of the things you need to think about if you're going to use this is if you have any breakage that comes back and it comes back as good product, which some of you do have, you want to make sure you've removed all the breakage from VIP first before you auto slot the star good. You also want to think about, have you put all of your sellable product away? If you haven't put it away yet, and some of it is still sitting off to the side, you probably don't want to run auto slot. You probably want to use one of our manual programs like Easy Ops to put the product away one at a time until everything's put away. But if you do, if you can answer yes to all those questions, what you could do, same exact thing, you run auto slot on star good. It moves that one case to the designated pick location. So you can see my pick location went up by 55, and notice my totals are still the same. I still have 155 cases regardless. I just moved one product from one location to another. One of the last things we're going to talk about here is just understanding returned product in general. For those of you who are using check-in by reason code, you guys have the most options for LBI to kind of manipulate where product is going when it comes back. So that's an important piece to kind of think about. If you're not using those processes, you might want to consider that. Understand that when register runs, that's when the good product is now going to be on hand and the bad product is going to be removed from the system, again, based on your setup. The procedures key and ven or RF key and ven are important. If you have bad product coming back as good, you want to make sure that you're removing that product from the system if it really is breakage and you're taking care of it the next morning. You want to make sure you're doing this after register. I've got some people who try to do these things before register, but you really want to wait until that's done. And then you also want to consider, are you going to put all of your good product away before or after, or put none of it away? You got to think about those things when you're using the breakage and adjustment programs. And then last but not least, understanding this, that when an item comes back from the trade, it often doesn't have a code date associated with it. So the system has to make up a code date for it. So the way it does that is by a series of checking different locations. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to check to see if you have anything in a pick location for that item and what the oldest code date is in that pick location. If you don't have anything in the pick, it's going to check the backstock and say, what's the oldest code date in backstock? Great, I'm going to assign that to this item. And last but not least, if you have no inventory for that item and you have default code dates set up, which are generally 12/31/1999, it's going to use that and assign that as the code date for that item. So just important pieces to understand if you're kind of looking and going, why do I have this 12/31/99 on these products coming back in? This might be one of the pieces that's actually leading to that when the product comes back. Okay, so there are some things to consider. Like always, LBI really is a culture change, and it's going to take a lot of dedication. It really has to come from top down. You know, management really has to work with everyone, making sure they understand everything. When you decide to take this leap, or if you've already made this leap, you know, you can always contact VIP and we can help you with all of the setup and things like that and the training purposes. There are some things that you can start now. If you haven't already started using LBI, you can do real-time receiving now. You can do real-time breakage now. We have programs that do that and you don't have to use LBI at all. And then one of the things that you can do way ahead of time is actually label the warehouse. I'd encourage you to consult VIP because we've seen all kinds of different labeling techniques, and talk to us about you know, the digits and how you're going to define each location and so on and so forth. And you know, the last piece that's so important in LBI, and this is usually the #1 reason we have issues. If you move product, the system needs to know. So if at night when people are replenishing, if they don't tell the system that they've moved product, you're going to have a bit of a mess in the morning and you're going to have to clean that up when you are counting. So very important. Anytime you move product, you got to tell the system. Everyone has to do their part. So I am going to open this up to questions, and I'm sure you guys probably have some, maybe even particular with my numbers that I was showing you guys there, and I will correct that for later, but let's see what we got here. Okay. All right. So one of the questions I was getting was about commitments. Like, why does the commitment column, why does it show a negative amount there? And one of those things, it's kind of interesting when you're actually looking at it, is the way the system works is it actually takes the on-hand amount in the layer file and then adds it to the commitment, and that gives you your available. So when you see it on the screen, you know, I always tell you it's the on-hand minus the commitment, and that's going to be, excuse me, that's going to be the available amount. But really, when you look at it across the screen, if you just add up the on-hand plus the negative amount in the commitment, that's going to give you the available in general. Okay, let's see what else I have here. So will I be providing a copy of the presentation? So I don't actually provide the PowerPoint slides necessarily online. If you guys wanted to reach out to me, I could give you a PDF copy of the slides, so that's easily done. But this actual recording will be on the website for you guys, the support site for you guys to access at any time. Would the StarGood location be useful for short-coded product that is given to specific accounts? No, I would probably create a separate location altogether for that. But the short-coded product thing, if you want to direct things to certain accounts, the LBI system doesn't allow you to, how do I say this? It doesn't allow you to have the system automatically commit from certain locations. It pretty much either just commits from the pick or from a backstock location. There are some ways we can work around that. So specific to that piece, you could always give us a call and we could help you with it. But there is no way for the system to commit from a specific location. And I don't think I would use StarGood that way because it might get confusing, particularly if you wanted to use AutoSlot later on. Let's see, what if product is changed at check-in time in the iPad from sellable to breakage? Does it show in StarGood or StarBad? When does it change at register? So if you are using check-in by reason code, and when I say check-in by reason code, I mean that you have to have two specific Z controls set exactly a certain way, and we can talk about what those Z controls are. If you're using check-in by reason code, whatever the checker says, that's what's happening to the product, and that's where it's going to go. So if the checker says that it's breakage, it's going to go into StarBad. If the checker says that it's good, then it's going to go into the good location. I just want to make a note, if you're using mobility, you do not have this option. Whatever the driver says is what you get to do. So that's an important piece of just understanding. With VIP's tools, you have a little more flexibility, but if you are using mobility, if the driver says it's bad, it's going into bad. If the driver says it's good, it's going into good. It looks like a lot of people are requesting the slides, so that's great. And it looks like someone is looking for maybe just some details of part 2. Just so you guys know what I'm thinking about going over in part 2, I'll actually just jump to that real quick for you. Ooh, there we go. I'm going to cover cycle counting very thoroughly. I'm going to give you some troubleshooting options when you're cycle counting. I'm going to go over loc PR loc and how that should be used on a daily basis to check your staging locations. I am going to show you how to investigate your staging locations once you see product there that you don't know why it should be there, and even talk about how to I'm not going to talk about how to set up replenishment tasks because I've actually already done a webinar on that, on IY refill and all those pieces. About 2 years ago, we did that webinar, but I will just talk about like some of the key pieces that you need to understand in general. So someone was asking, is mobility the same as driver iOS and iPads? So mobility is specific to Anheuser-Busch, just so you guys are aware of that. And that's a choice that you guys would make. They haven't the ability to run the same program on iOS as well, but it's not the same as VIP's iOS, iPad procedures that we have. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Please keep typing in your questions. I love the more questions you have, it's great. Honestly, just keep asking them, and then I will send out the answers to all of your questions So I'll leave this open for about 5 more minutes, and hopefully we'll see you guys in another month to go over part 2. Thank you very much.